Hello, welcome to the Beasley Equine Podcast. I'm your host and equine veterinarian, Dr. Travis Beasley. Today we're going to talk about the overweight horse and what you guys need to do this spring to get your horse ready for pasture and exercise, so stay tuned.
Veterinary surgeon or start to come quick. Draw the syringe and give it a flick. Bring your little black bag with the medicines in. Bring the trank and the crank and the penicillin.
So if you're like me, you love going out at feeding time, seeing your horses all excited to eat, and we usually kill them with kindness. Same thing happens in the small animal worlds with overweight dogs and cats. Many horses, given the opportunity, will eat themselves to death, literally. So what we got to do is find that healthy balance to keep your horses from getting overweight and all the trouble that comes from it. I just lost about 40 or 50 pounds last year, and it wasn't fun. But with diet and exercise, no shots, nothing, I can't tell you how much better I feel, and the same is true for your horse. So no matter how much your horse enjoys eating, you are doing them a disservice if you're overfeeding them, because those excess pounds, just like I experienced, put a lot of strain on every body system. We just got to give them enough food and exercise in proper amounts to keep them fit and healthy. So maintaining the ideal weight, just like us and dogs and cats, it's not always easy. A lot of horses are what we call easy keepers, mean they don't need many calories. Most of them can stay fat on air, and that can be really, really challenging with these and lead to a lot of problems too. And I also have a mini that's prone to this, and minis and ponies especially seem to store a lot of excess fat. And many adult horses in their middle years, they're kind of like people. They start to hang on to some unneeded body weight. Some of them, their metabolism slows down. Some of them aren't getting exercised as much. So we got to really keep that in mind. And when the weight gain becomes extreme, just like in people, we classify these horses as obese. So what's the problem with overweight horses? We see a lot of problems. And like I said, it increases the stress on body systems in the heart and the lungs. That's a big one. And then also it increases the risk of laminitis or founder. And you're going to increase the risk of developmental orthopedic, like bone and joint problems in young and growing horses and adult horses too. The more weight your horse has, the more stress and strain they're putting on their joints and their feet and their limbs. So if they do have a little underlying arthritis, a lot of those symptoms are worse, and they're less efficient at cooling of their body temperatures. And where we live in Southern Illinois, we have a lot of trail riders, and in the springtime, we'll always get a lot of call because people will go out with their overweight horse and think they can ride in the excessive heat and humidity, and it just, these horses get overheated. They might tie up. They just can't cool themselves as good as a horse that's in an ideal body condition. And then the other thing that happens with these fat horses, just like in people, fat builds up around key organs, which interferes with the normal function, like the heart and everything like that. And it's springtime, it's breeding season, so these overweight mares can actually have reduced reproductive efficiency. Same thing with super skinny ones and super overweight ones. Breeding is kind of a luxury. A horse's body is going to take care of itself before it allows itself to get in full. And then, of course, the overweight horse, they're going to be more lethargic and less resistance to fatigue. They're going to tire easy and just not have a general good athletic ability and be able to cool themselves. So when it comes to horses' weight, you could say beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I remember one older person saying their favorite color of horse was fat, but that's not necessarily good for all these horses. So when we talk about weight, we'll talk about body condition in horses, and every horse is a little bit different. What's ideal? Your endurance horse or race horse may have a little bit leaner and show fit versus a halter horse or a mare that's used for breeding or trail riding. And because it's subjective, we like to use that body condition scoring system to speak kind of in relative terms, because with all the height and breed differences, weight doesn't matter as much as the body condition. And a lot of these horses, it's hard to actually measure their weight. So we rate their physical condition based on looking at the horse and palpating it, which means putting your hands on there and seeing what you can feel. We range the scores from 1 to 9, where 1 is like the rescue horse that's tied to a concrete block in somebody's yard with nothing to eat, super skinny, a bag of bones, all the way to 9, which is extremely fat. So we'll go over a little bit of how we do that. You can find the body, if you type in on the internet, equine body condition score, you'll find lots of good resources to check your own horse. So we'll look at the amount of flesh that covers the fat or the back and the neck. We'll look at the withers, down the crease of the back, the tail head, ribs, and behind the shoulder. So a score of 1, the horse is basically emaciated. The spinous processes or the backbone, you can see they're sticking up. You can see all the ribs. The tail head is easy. The point of the hip, pretty much they look like a skeleton with skin over them. And that's a body condition score of 1, which is really poor. The next one up, a score of 2, they're very thin horses, but not quite as thin as the 1. You can still, the spinous process or the backbone is prominent, and the ribs and tail head and pelvic bones stand out. The structures of the withers, neck, and shoulders are faintly discernible, where the 1, you could see everything really good. 2, the stuff up the withers, neck, and shoulders are just fairly discernible. And 3 is still a thin horse. The backbone stands out, but fat covers them to midpoint, and there's very slight fat covered that can be felt over the ribs, but the spinous processes and ribs are still easily seen, and the tail head can be prominent. The tubercocci bones are visible, but appear kind of rounded versus the sharpness of a score of 1 to 2. And when we get up to score of 4, that's a moderately thin horse. They'll have a negative crease along its back, and the outline of the ribs can just be seen, not terribly easy like the lower scores. And then fat can be felt along the tail head, but the point of the hips can't really be seen that good, and the withers, neck, and shoulders don't look obviously thin like the other ones. And a score of 5, that's a moderate body condition score. The back is level, ribs are not visually distinguishable but easily felt, meaning you can't really see them, but if you go up there and put a little pressure on there, you can feel them really easily. And the fat around the tail head feels just a little bit spongy, and the withers look rounded, and the shoulders and neck blend smoothly into the body. And that's a body condition score of 5 or moderate. Then we jump up to 6, which we call moderately fleshy. And there may be a slight crease down the back, just slight, and then the fat around the tail head feels soft, and the fat over the ribs feels spongy. So you got to press a little harder to feel the ribs on these. And there might be small deposits along the side of the withers, behind the shoulders, and along the neck. And score of 7 we call fleshy. And there may be a crease down the back, maybe not deep enough to roll a marble, but there's a crease. And the individual ribs can be felt, but there is a noticeable fat between them. So you got to push a little bit harder on these. And the fat, again, around the tail head soft, and the fat is noticeable in the withers and the neck and behind the shoulder. This is where we kind of get into these cresty neck things. And that's sometimes the difference between a score of 6 and 7. And then a score of 8, think of the real fat donkey out in pasture with these. So they'll have that deep crease down their back, and the spaces of the ribs are filled with fat, so the ribs can be really hard to feel. Sometimes you got to push really hard if you can even feel them at all. And then along the withers and the tail head, the fat is there and it's soft, and the space behind the shoulders is filled and flush, and there's fat deposited along the inner buttocks. But again, think of that fat donkey. And then up to score number 9, this is an extremely fat or extremely obese horse. The crease down its back is very obvious. You could probably take a shooter marble and roll it down there. There's fat in patches over the ribs. There might be bulging fat around the tail head, the withers and shoulders and neck, and then the fat along the inner buttocks may cause them to rub together, and the flank is filled in with flesh. So 9 is extremely fat. So we have all these scores from 1 to 9. So what is ideal? Again, that kind of depends on what your horse is going to do. Somewhere in that 5 to 6 are usually ideal, but depending on the job, the weight may change based on what the maximum performance. So Your race horses, polo horses, endurance horses might be perfectly fit with a body condition score of 4, which some people would call them a little thin, while some of these quarter horses may be up to 7 to really be successful in the show ring. So by feeding your horse to a level of 8, you're really pushing the limits of good health in that horse. And horses with a score of 8 or 9 are really big candidates for a weight reduction plan. And most of the weight reduction is in your hands as a horse owner. You hold the keys to controlling your horse's weight. So just like with people, diet and exercise, and dedication to regular exercise while restraining yourself when it comes to the feeding time will help with a weight loss program. So you want to increase the amount of exercise in your horse to kind of rev up their metabolism and get that metabolism to burn more calories. And if you shift to a lower calorie diet, you're going to create the energy deficit so the horse can begin to utilize some of the fat reserves as fuel. So they're not burning as much calories from their feed, but they're reaching into the reserves to burn some of that fat off, just like it does in people. And even though you're going to be giving them a ration with fewer calories, we still have to balance that and provide all the essential nutrients. So we got to develop a program that will allow your horse to reduce its weight without any negative side effects. Luckily, on the market now, there's lots of good, what we call ration balancers, which like the Purina Enrich, that's a pretty high protein but lower starch and sugar. And it's designed, these ration balancers are designed for horses that control their weight on hay or pasture alone, and it makes up for any nutritional deficits in your pasture or hay with vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. But every horse is a little different, so talk to your vet if your horse is up there to that 8 or 9 body condition score, and they'll help you develop a plan to help your horse lose weight. And there's lots of other things to consider than what we're talking about today, but this is just kind of a glimpse into it. So one thing I always tell people is be patient. It takes a while to get weight off, and we got to do it slow and steady. That way we don't stress the horses and create some metabolic upsets, because we can do just like people and create problems by reducing the weight and calories too fast. And kind of a rule of thumb is make changes in both the type of amount and feed gradually. Reduce your rations by no more than 10% over a 7 to 10 day period. So maybe 1% a day over a 10-day period. And then also provide plenty of fresh water for these guys to keep their digestive and other systems functioning efficiently as possible while they're getting rid of the body's metabolic waste. And select feeds that have plenty of high quality fiber, but are also low in total energy. And the other thing is, we ask people all the time, how much do you feed them? And they say, well, a pound scoop or a 3-pound scoop. But every feed is a little bit different. So get in the habit of weighing your particular feed. You can get a kitchen scale and know how much you're actually feeding, because a third of a coffee can, it may be a different size coffee can, or maybe a more dense thing. So really try to get in the habit of figuring out how to weigh your feed and know what they're doing to really decrease it accurately as you start your weight loss program for your horse. And you can also track your horse's progress with a weight tape. If you're not familiar with these things, it's basically like a thin tape, like a seamstress tape that's marked off by weight, and it gives us a really good guesstimate of a horse's weight. We use them all the time in the clinic since we don't have a scale, and it's usually really accurate for calculating antibiotic doses and stuff like that. But even if you don't have one of those, even a seamstress tape, something to measure the weight of your horse. And you can put the tape just behind the withers and around their midsection there. And even if you don't have the weight tape, you can get a string and mark it and make sure that we're decreasing that size. And then when the exercise comes in, you want to do the same thing as the feed. Do it gradually. It takes time to build up the fitness in the horse. We always talk about legging them up. There's a lot of science behind that too. You can't just take a fat horse from the pasture that hasn't been working and expect to put them in an intense exercise program. Really leg them up. The slower you go, the better. You can ride them, you can lunge them, drive them, and if there's options available and you have the budget, there's also centers that can swim them, that have treadmills or underwater treadmills, and that can be really beneficial to increasing your horse's fitness without stressing their legs too much at the beginning. And when you're selecting feeds, we want some lower fat because fat is so energy dense. So switch to reduce the amount of fat and the calories in the feed. Talk to your vet, talk to your county extension office, and they can guide you on some of this stuff. And we love alfalfa. We love it for the stomach. It's a good quality hay. But if your horse is overweight, that may not be the best option for him. So we may need to switch hays or reduce the amount of alfalfa and replace it with a mature grass hay to reduce the calories. And this also provides your horse a lot of roughage if you get lower calorie hay where they can still eat and feel full all day without consuming all the calories of like an alfalfa hay. And you can always get your hay analyzed too. Most vets know places that do it, or your county extension office, or even your local farm service place like that. And you can evaluate the starches, the calories, the nutrients, vitamins, and minerals, and then we can make up for any deficiencies by supplementing those. And one thing we see with some people, a lot of these overweight horses have a voracious appetite, so they may gulp theirs down in no time. And if they're the dominant horse and they're out with pasture mates, they may push somebody else off for feed. So I would always recommend feeding these guys if they're like that by themselves. That way they don't have the opportunity to eat any of the other horse's food. And then the same thing with pasture. So we want to balance the horse's diet based on the age and activity level and make sure that the horse's vitamins, mineral, and protein requirements are met. And if you can have your hay tested, again, that's a great way to figure out what we need to add to compensate for the lower quality of hay and the less dense nutrient food. And then we always get calls about hay bellies. So what that is basically, it may or may not be associated with actually true obesity. It may just be the volume of hay in these horses. So they're kind of just a distension of the abdomen due to the volume of grass or hay, and the belly just expands to hold that. But to eliminate a hay belly, we just want to reduce the total volume of feed that passes through the system. So the well-balanced complete feed may be a good way to reduce the total volume without adversely affecting the amount of fiber or nutrients required for the proper digestion and nutrition. And then many apparent hay bellies, especially in younger horses, may be the result of parasitism or parasites, intestinal worms. So if you see that, consult with your veterinarian, run a fecal egg count, and we can really guide you on deworming if that hay belly look is from parasites. So once we get an ideal body condition with the horse, we want to maintain that proper weight. And that can be quite a balancing act because you'll have to probably readjust your horse's ration to stabilize its weight. And if you decrease your exercise or it's later in the season, you're doing more, but you want to continue to exercise because that's a key component in keeping your horse fit and legged up. And because that obesity can affect a horse's health, keep a good line of communication with your equine vet. This is where it's good to have a good relationship. You know, if it's springtime and the pasture's coming on, your horse may look fat, they'll take the time to pick up the phone when you call and kind of walk them through it. And regular checkups, especially while you're reducing weight, just to kind of check in and get all that and make sure your horse is doing good. So that's kind of a brief overview. We thought we'd touch on this topic. And then the other thing is in Southern Illinois, it's going to be grazing season soon. So a lot of these overweight horses really can benefit from a grazing muzzle. If you're not familiar with that, it hooks on the end of a halter. It looks kind of like a muzzle. And there's usually just one little hole in it, and it just decreases the amount of grass a horse can eat. They can still graze, but it just slows them down a little bit. But beware, in the real hot, humid days, we all felt their pain during COVID as we wore these masks. It can be hard to breathe. There are some that they're mainly plastic, and they look more like a dog muzzle you'd see on like a cop show with a canine police officer. But I have seen those as the horses are grazing, it wear down the front of the incisors. So be cautious on that. But a grazing muzzle is a great option if you have to turn an obese horse out. I've got 2 of my 3 horses that when I kick them out to the big pasture will be wearing a grazing muzzle, or they're going to be in here getting feed x-rays because of founder. So if you have any questions, call your veterinarian, reach out to us, look us up on Facebook, send us a message. And thanks for tuning in. Check out our YouTube channel. And until next time, take care of your horses and yourself.
Veterinary surgeon or start to come quick. Draw the syringe and give it a flick. Bring your little